China has already found a way around U.S. tariffs on imports.
Anna Corrin reports China is exporting its factories.
Now, China has vowed to counter U.S. pressure on tariffs and trade, accusing Washington of repaying kindness with resentment.
The trade war just turned into an all-out economic battlefield, and this time, China isn't holding back. With the US imposing steep new tariffs, China has launched a counterstrike aimed directly at the heart of American industry. Beijing's response isn't just about sending a message. It's a calculated economic weapon, one that could bring the US auto industry to its knees. By slapping crippling tariffs on American-made vehicles and critical auto parts, China is cutting off billions in revenue, making it nearly impossible for US automakers to compete in the global market. This isn't just a diplomatic spat, it's economic warfare. And the stakes? Nothing less than the survival of an industry that has powered America for over a century. So how bad is it? Which companies are about to take the biggest hit? And could this be the final blow that shifts global auto dominance to China forever? Let's break it all down. China's counterstrike shakes the American auto industry. For decades, the United States has dominated the global automobile market, exporting vehicles and auto parts worldwide. Major manufacturers like Ford, General Motors, and Tesla relied on international markets to fuel their growth, with China emerging as their most crucial battleground. However, a single move by China sent shockwaves through the industry. By imposing heavy tariffs on American-made cars and auto components, China effectively slammed the door shut on billions of dollars worth of exports. This was not a random decision. It was a calculated strike against a critical weak point in the American economy. The fallout was immediate and brutal, and no one expected what came next. Shipments stalled, automakers scrambled to reassess supply chains, and the stock market spiraled downward as investors grasped the full impact of the trade escalation. This was not just another bump in the ongoing trade war. This was a direct attack on one of America's most iconic industries. For years, American automakers enjoyed unparalleled access to Chinese consumers. China had become the world's largest new car market, and companies like General Motors thrived, selling more vehicles in China than in the United States itself. Tesla, fresh off the success of its Shanghai Gigafactory, relied heavily on Chinese demand to expand its footprint. Ford and Chrysler, already struggling with challenges at home, leaned on China as a key pillar of their survival strategies. That access vanished overnight. Tariffs made American cars uncompetitive, forcing automakers to watch as their market share in China collapsed. Tesla, which had once been positioned to dominate the electric vehicle landscape in China, now faced restrictions that threatened its future in the region. Ford and Chrysler found themselves locked out of a market they had spent years cultivating, leaving them scrambling for alternatives. A supply chain in crisis. China's counterstrike did not stop at tariffs on finished vehicles. It went even deeper, targeting the global supply chain that American automakers relied upon. The US auto industry was more than just car manufacturers. It depended on an intricate network of suppliers, parts manufacturers, and raw material imports. China placed restrictions on the export of rare earth metals, which are essential for manufacturing electric vehicle batteries and semiconductors. Without these crucial materials, American automakers faced production delays, skyrocketing costs, and in some cases, the inability to build vital components at all. The ripple effect reached far beyond automakers, hitting steel manufacturers, dealerships, and parts suppliers. Workers in states like Michigan and Ohio, already struggling with economic instability, suddenly faced the threat of mass layoffs and plant closures. The United Auto Workers Union, already engaged in tense negotiations over wages and working conditions, now had to contend with a crisis that threatened to shut factories down altogether. The financial markets wasted no time punishing the auto sector. Stocks for major US automakers plummeted within hours of China's announcement, erasing billions in market value. Analysts downgraded their projections, issuing dire warnings about the future of the American auto industry. Foreign automakers, particularly those in Europe and Japan, seized the opportunity to capitalize on America's misfortune. With American brands locked out of China, their competitors stepped in to fill the void, solidifying their presence in the world's largest car market. As American companies struggled with trade restrictions and supply chain disruptions, global rivals strengthened their grip on a market that had once been a cornerstone of US economic power. The real strategy behind China's move. This was not just a tit-for-tat trade dispute. China's Counterstrike had a much larger goal. China had spent years aggressively developing its domestic electric vehicle industry, investing heavily in automakers like BYD and NIO. These companies were positioning themselves as global leaders in the future of transportation. By cutting off American automakers from the Chinese market and limiting their access to critical materials, China forced the United States to fall behind in the race for electric vehicle dominance. While American companies struggled to reconfigure supply chains, Chinese automakers surged ahead, strengthening their position in an industry that would define the future of transportation. The implications of China's move went beyond the auto industry. The US-China trade war had already been escalating, but this latest retaliation signaled a dangerous new phase. The automobile sector had long symbolized American industrial strength, and China's decision to strike at its core was nothing short of economic warfare. Diplomatic efforts scrambled to contain the damage, but the consequences were already unfolding. US allies watched with concern, realizing that China's move would have global repercussions. If the United States could not protect its auto industry from such an attack, what would happen to other sectors? The trade war was no longer about tariffs on steel or technology. It had evolved into a precise and devastating strategy to cripple industries essential to American economic dominance. The future of American automakers. With access to China's market cut off and production costs rising, American automakers faced a grim reality. Some companies explored moving production to other countries to bypass tariffs, but these shifts came with major logistical hurdles and long-term risks. Others looked for domestic solutions, hoping the US government would step in with subsidies or policies to offset the financial damage. For American consumers, the consequences hit just as hard. Vehicle prices soared as supply chain disruptions caused shortages and increased manufacturing costs. Dealerships struggled to sell cars, and financing options tightened as banks braced for economic uncertainty. The dream of car ownership, once a cornerstone of American prosperity, became more expensive than ever. In boardrooms across Detroit and Silicon Valley, executives scrambled to navigate an industry that had been thrown into chaos overnight. Expansion and innovation took a back seat as companies focused on survival and damage control. The fate of the US auto sector, from traditional gas-powered vehicles to the future of electric cars, now hung in the balance. Beyond the auto industry, China's move sent a clear message. Economic warfare had entered a new era. Trade disputes were no longer broad battles over tariffs, but had evolved into precision strikes designed to cripple specific industries. The United States, once confident in its ability to dictate global trade rules, now found itself reacting to an attack it never saw coming. The full consequences of China's counterstrike would take time to unfold, but one thing was certain: the global auto industry had changed forever. What had started as a tariff dispute had escalated into a high-stakes economic battle with no clear resolution. America's auto industry, once a dominant force, now faced one of its greatest challenges yet. China's decision to impose severe tariffs on American-made cars and auto components was not a knee-jerk reaction. It was a calculated move designed to strike at one of the biggest vulnerabilities in the US economy. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Shipments of American vehicles to China stopped almost overnight. Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, which had long relied on the Chinese market to sustain profits, suddenly found themselves locked out. Even Tesla, which had bet big on its Shanghai gigafactory, faced a crisis that put its future in jeopardy. For an industry that had invested billions into expansion in China, the tariffs were nothing short of a financial disaster. But China's attack went far beyond slapping tariffs on finished cars. It targeted the very lifeblood of the industry, the global supply chain. American automakers didn't just sell cars in China, they relied on Chinese materials to build them. And that's where the real damage was done. The modern auto industry depends on a web of suppliers and manufacturers stretching across multiple continents. One of the most critical links in that chain: rare earth metals, materials essential for producing everything from electric vehicle batteries to semiconductors. China didn't just restrict US car exports, it cut off access to these vital resources. Without a steady supply of rare earth metals like neodymium and dysprosium, production lines in the United States began grinding to a halt. Companies scrambled to find new suppliers, but alternative sources like Australia and Canada lacked the scale and efficiency of Chinese operations. Establishing domestic production of these materials would take years, if not decades. The Biden administration had pushed for increased domestic mining of critical minerals, but those efforts had barely begun. Meanwhile, automakers faced the grim reality that they simply could not build cars without the raw materials they no longer had access to. The stock market meltdown. Wall Street reacted with brutal efficiency. As soon as China announced its counterstrike, stocks for major American automakers plummeted. Ford, General Motors, and Tesla saw billions wiped from their market value in mere days. Analysts rushed to downgrade their projections, warning that US automakers could be in for a prolonged downturn. Investors, once confident in the steady rise of electric vehicle production and overseas expansion, now saw the industry as a high-risk bet. Panic selling spread, with pension funds, mutual funds, and retirement accounts taking severe hits due to their exposure to auto stocks. The uncertainty sent shockwaves through the broader economy, forcing financial institutions to rethink their long-term outlooks. Foreign automakers, particularly those in Europe and Japan, wasted no time capitalizing on the crisis. With American brands suddenly locked out of China, their competitors swooped in to fill the gap. Volkswagen, Toyota, and Hyundai expanded their footprint in the Chinese market, securing deals and partnerships that further cemented their global dominance. The political fallout was just as severe as the economic one. President Donald Trump had championed aggressive tariffs as a way to protect American industries, promising that they would bring jobs back to the United States. But instead, the move had triggered a trade war that left the auto industry in ruins. Lawmakers from both parties scrambled to respond. Some called for an immediate reversal of the tariffs, fearing that continued escalation would only worsen the crisis. Others pushed for massive government intervention, bailouts, subsidies, and emergency funding to prop up struggling automakers. But the damage had already been done. China's strategy had not just been about economic retaliation, it was about shifting global power. By crippling the US auto industry, China positioned itself as the leader in the next phase of automotive development, the rise of China's electric vehicle empire. While American automakers struggled, Chinese car manufacturers surged ahead. Companies like BYD, NIO, and XPeng had already been gaining traction in the electric vehicle market. Now, with American brands weakened, they accelerated their international expansion. China had spent years investing in EV infrastructure, battery technology, and green energy policies. Now, the country's automakers had the perfect opportunity to dominate. They pushed into Europe, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, forming partnerships and capturing market share that US companies could no longer defend. As global demand for electric vehicles skyrocketed, China stood at the forefront of the industry, while the United States scrambled to recover. The shifting consumer behavior played directly into China's hands. Nations worldwide ramped up climate policies, phasing out gasoline-powered cars in favor of EVs. And China, with its supply chains intact and its automakers stronger than ever, was ready to lead the charge. With access to critical materials severed, exports halted, and competition intensifying, US automakers found themselves at a crossroads. Some considered moving production to other countries in an effort to bypass tariffs, but such a shift would be a logistical nightmare. Others called for massive government investment in domestic manufacturing, hoping to rebuild supply chains from within. But neither option offered an immediate solution. Rebuilding American supply chains would take years, and in the meantime, companies faced massive revenue losses. For American consumers, the impact was unavoidable. Car prices soared as supply chain disruptions led to shortages and increased manufacturing costs. Dealerships struggled to move inventory, while financing options tightened as banks prepared for further economic instability. The dream of car ownership, once a defining feature of American prosperity, had never been more expensive. The fallout from China's counterstrike against the US auto industry had already taken its toll, leaving American automakers in an uphill battle for survival. What started as a trade dispute quickly escalated into a full-scale economic crisis, with ripple effects that reached far beyond corporate boardrooms. Consumers, once insulated from the complexities of global trade, now found themselves caught in the crossfire, facing skyrocketing car prices and financial uncertainty. As supply chains collapsed and production costs soared, the price of new vehicles surged, putting car ownership further out of reach for everyday Americans. With limited access to raw materials, automakers struggled to keep production lines running, leading to vehicle shortages that drove up prices. Consumers who had once relied on affordable financing now faced an even bigger hurdle. Soaring interest rates and inflation made car loans significantly more expensive. With new cars becoming unaffordable, the demand for used vehicles skyrocketed, pushing prices even higher. Dealerships, caught between inventory shortages and rising costs, struggled to maintain sales. The American dream of owning a car, once taken for granted, had become a financial burden that few could afford. Automakers face tough decisions. As the crisis deepened, US automakers scrambled to find solutions. Some sought to shift production to other countries like Mexico, South Korea, and India in an effort to bypass Chinese tariffs. But moving production wasn't a simple fix. It came with logistical challenges, regulatory roadblocks, and high costs that made relocation a costly gamble. Others turned to drastic cost-cutting measures, downsizing their workforce, slashing research and development budgets, and delaying new vehicle models. While these moves were necessary for short-term survival, they ultimately weakened the industry's long-term competitiveness. Innovation stalled, and US automakers found themselves falling further behind in an industry that was evolving faster than ever. China's counterstrike didn't just cripple the auto sector, it exposed the deep vulnerabilities of America's economic structure. For decades, US manufacturers had relied heavily on global supply chains, assuming that access to key materials and international markets would always be guaranteed. That illusion shattered as China flexed its economic muscle, demonstrating its ability to dictate the terms of global trade. The auto industry, once a symbol of American strength, now faced an existential crisis. The balance of power in the global automotive market had shifted, with China emerging as the dominant force. What had once been a US-led industry was now being rewritten in real time, with American automakers struggling to reclaim their place at the top. The global market moves on without the US. While US companies fought to stay afloat, China capitalized on the disruption, expanding its influence in key markets. American automakers had long relied on emerging economies like Brazil, South Africa, and India to offset domestic struggles. But now, Chinese manufacturers stepped in, offering high-quality vehicles at lower prices, effectively sidelining US brands. Even in traditional strongholds, American automakers found themselves losing ground. Consumers, once loyal to brands like Ford and General Motors, turned to Chinese automakers that had rapidly improved their technology, efficiency, and affordability. The very markets that US companies had counted on for stability were now embracing China's growing auto dominance. As the US auto industry faltered, European manufacturers saw an opportunity to strengthen ties with China. Germany, France, and Italy had long been wary of the escalating trade war, recognizing the potential economic fallout. Instead of taking sides, they chose to forge deeper partnerships with Chinese automakers, securing access to cutting-edge battery technology and China's vast consumer base. These alliances left US companies isolated. Once reliant on European partnerships to remain competitive, American automakers now found themselves cut off from critical research, innovation, and market access. In a stunning twist, the US had inadvertently pushed its allies closer to China, further weakening its own global influence in the auto sector. The future of auto technology slips away. The trade war's impact extended beyond traditional car manufacturing. It set back America's position in the next generation of transportation. Electric vehicles, autonomous driving, and artificial intelligence were reshaping the industry, but China's strategic moves widened the gap between the two nations. The most devastating blow came with China's restrictions on rare earth metal exports. Lithium, cobalt, and nickel, essential components for advanced EV batteries, became increasingly difficult for American manufacturers to obtain. Tesla, once the undisputed leader in EV innovation, suddenly found itself struggling with material shortages and rising costs. Other US automakers that had planned ambitious EV rollouts were forced to scale back, delaying their transition to electrification. While American companies fought to keep production running, China surged ahead. The Chinese government poured billions into domestic EV manufacturers, ramped up battery research, and expanded its charging infrastructure at an unprecedented pace. As the US auto industry stalled, the crisis quickly became a political firestorm. President Donald Trump, who had pushed for tariffs as a way to protect American industry, now faced mounting criticism as one of the country's most iconic sectors collapsed. Lawmakers scrambled to respond, with some calling for emergency reversals of the tariffs and others pushing for federal aid to bail out struggling automakers. However, there was no quick fix. The damage had already been done. Moving production to other countries took time. Rebuilding domestic supply chains required years of investment. Meanwhile, American consumers continued to bear the brunt of the crisis, with soaring car prices and shrinking financing options making vehicle ownership increasingly difficult. A battle for survival. The US auto industry now faced an unavoidable reality. It could no longer rely on outdated strategies to stay competitive. The global market had changed, and American automakers needed to change with it. Rebuilding supply chains, securing alternative markets, and forging new partnerships would be critical. But success wasn't guaranteed. Government policies would have to prioritize industrial resilience, ensuring that American manufacturing remained independent of foreign economic pressures. But even with strong leadership and strategic planning, the question remained, was it too late? The trade war had shattered the long-standing belief that the US could dictate global trade rules. China had made its move, and the consequences were unfolding in real time. The American auto industry, once the world's undisputed leader, had suffered a blow that might prove irreversible. The American auto industry had always been more than just cars. It was a symbol of innovation, economic strength, and national pride. But in the wake of China's calculated counterstrike, that foundation crumbled. What started as a trade war quickly spiraled into an economic and technological battle that left US automakers scrambling to survive. With supply chains disrupted, production costs soaring, and access to the world's largest auto market severed, the industry found itself at a crossroads. Could it adapt and reclaim its former dominance? Or was this the beginning of an irreversible decline? The answer would not only determine the future of American car manufacturing, but also reshape global economic power. The financial fallout, a crisis for consumers and industry leaders. The immediate impact of the trade war hit consumers hard. Car prices skyrocketed as supply chain disruptions made manufacturing more expensive. Automakers, unable to secure critical materials like rare earth metals and semiconductors, produced fewer vehicles, driving up costs. Consumers who had once been able to buy a new car without hesitation now found themselves priced out of the market. Used car prices also surged as demand increased, making even second-hand vehicles unaffordable for many Americans. Dealerships, caught in the chaos, struggled to manage fluctuating inventory and unpredictable pricing. Interest rates on car loans climbed, tightening consumer access to financing. What had once been a routine purchase turned into a financial nightmare, forcing many to rethink their options. As the months dragged on, US automakers faced brutal decisions. Some attempted to shift production to other countries to bypass tariffs, exploring partnerships in Mexico, South Korea, and India. However, relocating production brought its own challenges: logistical nightmares, high costs, and regulatory hurdles. Others resorted to cost-cutting measures, slashing research and development budgets, delaying new vehicle models, and laying off workers to stay afloat. These moves, while necessary for short-term survival, weakened the industry's long-term competitiveness. While US automakers scrambled to react, China continued its aggressive expansion, reshaping the global auto industry in ways few had anticipated. China's masterstroke, seizing control of the future. As American manufacturers struggled, China wasted no time consolidating its dominance. With US automakers bogged down by supply chain issues and financial turmoil, Chinese car companies surged ahead. China's investment in electric vehicles and autonomous technology paid off at the perfect moment. Companies like BYD, NIO, and XPeng accelerated their global expansion, flooding markets with affordable high-tech vehicles. Latin America, Africa, and parts of Europe, once strongholds for American car brands, saw an influx of Chinese-made electric cars. Consumers embraced them, drawn by their cutting-edge technology and lower costs. Meanwhile, China deepened its ties with European automakers, forming joint ventures that gave Chinese brands access to high-end markets while securing advanced battery technology for European manufacturers. This strategic alignment further isolated American automakers, leaving them struggling to keep up. Even in traditional US strongholds, China's influence grew. Chinese automakers secured government contracts in key regions, expanding infrastructure for electric vehicles and self-driving technology. While US manufacturers battled survival, China took control of the future. The auto industry's collapse sends shockwaves through the US economy. The devastation in the auto industry triggered a broader economic collapse that rippled through every corner of the American economy. Unemployment soared in key manufacturing states, hitting cities like Detroit, Louisville, and Kansas City the hardest. Factories shut down or scaled back production, leading to massive layoffs. The closure of plants had a domino effect. Restaurants, retail stores, and service industries that depended on auto workers' wages suffered massive losses. Small businesses shuttered, and local economies crumbled under the weight of declining consumer spending. The real estate market also took a hit. In the Midwest and southern states, where auto production had been an economic pillar, home values plummeted. Laid-off workers struggled to make mortgage payments, triggering a wave of foreclosures. Banks tightened lending standards, making homeownership increasingly difficult for those already reeling from financial instability. Wall Street, always quick to react, saw auto stocks nosedive. Investors who had once viewed the industry as a safe bet pulled their money, further destabilizing the sector. the ripple effects extended beyond car companies, pension funds, mutual funds, and 401k accounts linked to automakers lost billions. Political and geopolitical consequences. The US loses global influence. The trade war quickly escalated into a political firestorm. With the auto industry in freefall, Washington scrambled for solutions. Some lawmakers called for emergency government intervention, pushing for a bailout similar to the one seen during the 2008 financial crisis. Others argued against federal aid, claiming the industry had failed to modernize and should suffer the consequences. The political divide delayed relief efforts, leaving automakers and workers in limbo. Meanwhile, China tightened its grip on the global economy. The United States had long relied on its industrial strength as a pillar of national security, with the auto sector playing a key role in military production and logistics. But with the industry collapsing, concerns grew over America's ability to maintain its defense infrastructure in times of crisis. China exploited this vulnerability, strengthening its hold on critical supply chains. It secured new trade agreements, expanded its Belt and Road Initiative, and cemented economic alliances in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe. Nations that had once looked to the US for economic stability now turned to Beijing, drawn by its growing influence and financial incentives. For the first time, the US found itself losing control of global trade negotiations. What had once been an economic chess match had turned into a full-blown shift in global power, a desperate race to rebuild. As the US reeled from the crisis, automakers, policymakers, and industry leaders scrambled to find a path forward. Some argued that the only solution was a complete restructuring of the auto industry. They pushed for domestic supply chains, alternative materials, and aggressive investment in electric vehicle technology to break free from reliance on China. Others called for trade negotiations to repair relations and restore market access. However, the damage had already been done. Finding new suppliers for rare earth metals proved expensive and time-consuming, while investments in domestic mining and battery production required years to materialize. The federal government weighed emergency measures, including tariff rollbacks, economic stimulus packages, and incentives for manufacturers to invest in the US, but political gridlock slowed action, leaving the auto industry's fate uncertain. The future of American automakers. Can they reclaim their place? The trade war had revealed deep flaws in America's industrial strategy. The assumption that the US could dictate global trade rules had been shattered. China had made its move, and the consequences were clear. The American auto industry, once the world's undisputed leader, had suffered a blow that might be impossible to recover from. The industry faced a brutal reality. It could no longer operate under outdated strategies. If American automakers wanted to survive, they would need to rethink everything. That meant investing in next-generation technologies, rebuilding supply chains, and forming new global alliances. But even with strategic planning and bold leadership, one question remained. Was it too late? The days of US dominance in the auto industry had ended. China had taken the lead, and the race for the future of transportation now had a new frontrunner. What had begun as a tariff dispute had reshaped the entire global auto market. American car manufacturers, once seen as unshakable giants, now fought for survival. Meanwhile, China capitalized on the chaos, cementing its role as the new powerhouse of automotive technology. The US auto industry's survival depended on its ability to adapt, but whether it could reclaim its place at the forefront of innovation remained uncertain. The world had changed. The battle for dominance in the auto industry was no longer about cars. It was about power. And for the first time, the United States found itself on the losing side. Alright, so that's it for this video. And if you want to watch more amazing content like this, check out some of our other videos. Bye.